Gravediggaz, 6 Feet Deep. Never heard it. This album came out in 1994, which is my favorite year in hip-hop. You had Illmatic, Ready to Die, Southern Playalistic, The Diary, and tons of other classic albums that I love. And while this album is considered a classic, I don't think it's quite as popular as the albums that I just named, so it's possible that it just got lost in the shuffle. I was a teenager with limited income, and I couldn't buy every album that came out. The one thing I do remember about this album is the video for Nowhere to Run, Nowhere to Hide, where Poetic is dressed up like a scarecrow, and that image still haunts me to this day. I did end up picking up their 1997 album, The Pick, The Sickle, and The Shovel, mostly because, I mean, look at that album cover. But the only things I really remember about that album is that it didn't really sound like a horrorcore album. I remember seeing Prince Paul and RZA on the cover, but they barely produced anything on that album, and RZA only raps on about 3 or 4 songs. But we're not talking about that album, we're talking about 6 Feet Deep, so let's get into it. The album starts out with Constant Elevation, which is a really deranged, over-the-top song about peace. The Gravediggers have always said that their purpose was to wake up the mentally dead, so no matter how crazy they sound, they're always pushing for peace, which is probably best stated in the last verse where RZA, aka the Resurrected, chants, "Positive energy activates constant elevation," or peace. It's a really interesting way to start out the album and to state their modus operandi. There are a number of songs on this album where the premise of the song is, "We're coming to get you," and Nowhere to Run and Nowhere to Hide is one of those songs. One of the things I learned about this song is on the last verse where RZA comes in and says, "Here comes the drastic," and then it cuts out and then you hear the Protect Your Neck intro, and then he continues with his verse. Apparently Prince Paul did that to cover up a mistake. RZA was going to come in and redo his verse, but Prince Paul didn't want to wait, so he covered it up and made it sound like he did it on purpose. And that's the genius of Prince Paul. Also, my favorite line on this song is when RZA says, "Me being whack is like naps on Kojak." Defective Trip is a song where every member talks about doing different types of drugs, and the weirdest one is probably Poetic talking about sniffing glue. And even though he was high, he was still smart enough to not get a blowjob from a crackhead, which is probably a good choice. 2 Cups of Blood is one of the few songs that doesn't feature all of the members. It's just RZA and Poetic going back and forth. Apparently Fruquan just wasn't in the studio when they recorded this one. Blood Brothers is one of the most straightforward songs on the album where each member just talks about what it was like for them growing up. My favorite verse is probably RZA, where he talks about being 6'2" and bad at sports. It's also the only song on the album that was produced by Fruquan. 100 Suicide is the 3rd single from the album, which details all the ways in which you should kill yourself. Obviously, this song is satirizing the idea that hip-hop makes you do bad things. So they said, okay, if you believe that, then we'll make a song where we tell everybody to kill themselves and see if people kill themselves. And as far as I know, no one did, so point proven. Diary of a Madman is the 1st single from the album, and it's basically a courtroom drama where each rapper explains what possessed them both literally and figuratively to commit murder. This song marks the first time we ever get to hear Shabazz the Disciple and Killer Priest on record. Fruquan and RZA provide verses while Poetic plays the judge. Originally, this song was just 4 disjointed verses until Prince Paul, using his production genius, sewed everything together with the courtroom skit. Speaking of skits, 2 of the 7 questions from the 360 Questions interlude make reference to this song. Mommy What's a Gravedigger is a short and sweet song where each of the 3 members rap for 6 bars. I don't know if that was intentional, but either way, it's pretty spooky. Bang Your Head is easily the most aggressive song on the album, to the point that it kind of sounds like Onyx, specifically Throw Your Guns. The song was actually inspired by U-God's verse from The Mysteries of Chess Boxing, where he says, "Bang your head." And for some reason, all 3 verses on this song ended weird moments, like none of them finished writing their verses. All 3 MCs just rap until they run out of words, and then they just start yelling, "Bang your head." Here Come the Gravediggers was produced by Mr. Simi, who was apparently a friend of Poetic's, and this is his only production credit. And I don't mean on this album, I mean like literally. I can't find anything else about him. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Graveyard Chamber is a posse cut that includes Shabazz the Disciple, Dreddy Kruger, and Killer Priest. And Killer Priest probably has my favorite line on the whole album, where he says, "I'll dig through your chest like a jar of Vaseline." Wow. Death Trap is another excellent record that describes how people can put themselves in harm's way by being evil, dumb, or both. Also, Master Ace provides the intro for this song, but no verse. I'm not sure why. My favorite track on the album is 6 Feet Deep, which is one of the few songs that was produced by RZA. The story of the song is that the 4 members just went into the studio and started playing instruments, and it's pretty clear that none of these guys really know how to play these instruments, at least not well. RZA then took those recordings home, looped them up, and that's why the song sounds so left field. And I wish more songs on this album sounded like this. Yeah, even though there were albums that came out before this and albums that I probably liked more, this is the album that, one, gave the genre its name, even though they never really wanted to call it horrorcore. According to Prince Paul, the journalist Havelock Nelson came up with the name and the record label just ran with it. And two, the fact that the group contained 2 of hip-hop's most well-respected producers shed light on the genre and gave it a legitimacy that it really didn't have before. I'll put it this way. There have always been people that grew up loving comedy, right? But it wasn't until Judd Apatow gave it a name that the term comedy nerd became a legitimate thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that Prince Paul is the Judd Apatow of horrorcore. I don't know if I would ever listen to this album again top to bottom, but if I were to put it into rotation amongst all my other songs, I probably wouldn't skip any. So, have you heard 6 Feet Deep? I'm going to keep reviewing albums until I run out. Until then, I am Free Tillman, the only guy on the internet that doesn't know everything.